Hello my dears, today I want to talk about a video that I saw on Good Morning Britain where two doctors clashed on their differing perspectives on obesity. One of the doctors within the video was Dr. Chris Van Tulleken. Now Dr. Chris Van Tulleken is quite a significant figure within this obesity conversation here in the UK. He is someone who has been very outspoken about raising the awareness of ultra processed foods. He's been featured on very popular podcasts, he's given TED Talks, he's also worked with the BBC, and he's also released a book. Now, Dr. Chris Van Tulleken's views have spread far and wide, with many of his videos gaining millions and millions of views. Now, it's completely understandable why so many people are interested in what he has to say. I think that Dr. Chris Van Tulleken is a very insightful person. He does raise a lot of really good points about the food industry, and I also like his idea that we should maybe view ultra-processed foods as edible substances as opposed to food, because they don't really offer any real nourishment. And I think the idea of doing this could be quite helpful in making these foods less appealing. It's similar to what I've seen some vegans and vegetarians say they do in order to prevent themselves from eating meat. They'll call meat carcasses, or they'll call eggs chicken periods, or something like that, to make it as unappealing as possible to consume these foods. So I think by looking at ultra processed foods as edible substances as opposed to foods, it could potentially help some people to find them less appealing to eat. Now, despite how insightful Dr. Chris Van Tulleken can be, I do find some of what he says to be concerning at best and harmful at worst. In his efforts to be kind and compassionate, I think he preaches ideas that could be quite dangerous in regards to agency and obesity. And I do think that it's even more harmful coming from him because of the fact that he is a doctor. So it legitimizes a lot of his ideas, even if they're maybe not the best things to be saying to people. And you'll start to see what I mean as we watch this video where he was having a debate with another doctor on Good Morning Britain about how we should tackle the topic of obesity.
Obesity costs the NHS £6.5 billion a year in England alone. And some people say that the NHS shouldn't spend more on obese patients. They should pay for their own treatment.
Well, Dr. Chris Van Tulleken is an NHS doctor. He's also an associate professor at UCL and the author of Ultra-Processed People. And he says that making people pay is shaming those who have simply bigger bodies. While weight loss expert Dr. Eva Orsman says that obese patients should pay for any medical treatment that is obesity-related.
Now, I will just quickly say that I personally don't agree that we should charge obese people for healthcare. We don't charge smokers, we don't charge heavy drinkers, we don't charge people who regularly engage in extreme sports or dangerous behaviours. So if we don't punish other people for engaging in lifestyles that could be potentially harmful and cause them to use the NHS services more, then I don't see why it would be fair to make obese people pay for healthcare because of their lifestyle choices. It just, to me, I can see the argument for discrimination in this case because it's not something we're equally applying to other lifestyle choices that can be harmful. So that's not the issue I have with him in this video. It's the other stuff that he says.
If you do have the treatment, you're saying that you should pay for it. Why?
Yes, because I think you would take a different, personal responsibility, and you would also be more incentivized to actually do lifestyle changes. The fact that you just take a drug that makes you feel nauseous and you eat less because you are on the drug, that doesn't mean that you do healthy lifestyle choices and you make your ways permanently.
OK, Dr. Chris Van Tulleken, Rosie seems very pleased with her 7-stone weight loss. She doesn't seem to have any problems with side effects. But should everybody like Rosie be paying for this because it isn't motivating?
No, that argument is not just unethical, it's also scientifically inaccurate, and it's economic nonsense. So at the moment, people who live in larger bodies are forced to do so. They're primarily already disadvantaged groups. They're often people on low incomes who can only afford the kind of industrially processed, ultra-processed foods that we know lead to weight gain.
Now, this is my primary issue with Dr. Tulleken. He has this idea that people are forced to eat junk food, and as a result of that, they don't really have any control over their weight and their size. These are things that are essentially happening to them as opposed to things that they have any power to control. He essentially views obesity as something that kind of happens to someone as opposed to something that someone actively takes a part in. creating for themselves. His argument that people are obese because they can't afford to eat healthy, because healthy food is too expensive for them to obtain, first of all ignores the fact that obesity is a widespread issue across different people of different social backgrounds. It's not exclusively something that's only happening to low-income people. While it is true that eating healthy can be more expensive because proteins like meats, etc., do tend to be a lot more expensive, on top of that, fresh produce also tends to be more expensive. It expires a lot quicker, so you're having to purchase it more often compared to ultra processed foods, which are usually very high in preservatives and can last up to like months in your cupboard. People who are working class are more likely to be in jobs that have really long hours. They're more likely to do things like night shifts, etc., so they might not have the time to cook. So while eating healthy can be quite challenging sometimes, it's definitely doable. It just requires a bit more planning and a bit more strategy. So for example, rather than buying fresh produce, you could buy frozen or canned. These have a longer lifespan, so this does help to kind of prevent the whole issue of buying fresh produce and having a limited amount of time to use it before it goes off and then having to go and purchase some more, etc. Also, meal prepping or cooking in bulk can also help for those who are really low on time, because there are some people who work crazy hours and they just don't have the time to cook every single day. Just dedicating a few hours within the week to just bulk cook and meal prep and storing that food in the fridge and freezer can really help for people who are really low on time and don't have the time to cook every day, but still need to have healthy meals that are cooked from scratch, as opposed to gravitating towards ready meals or towards takeaway instead. And to be entirely honest with you, while it is way more ideal for people to lose weight through healthy food, you don't actually have to eat healthy to lose weight. You just need to have less calories consumed than you burn. So if Dr. Chris Van Tulleken's idea that people on low income can't eat healthy and can't lose weight because of the fact that they are on low income and so it's unobtainable for them, then technically speaking, they could continue to keep buying these unhealthy ultra processed foods, but just consume less of them and still manage to lose weight. And they could also engage in free exercise like walking regularly during the week. Because in reality, it's not really so much the food that makes us fat, it's the overconsumption of foods that makes us fat. You can gain weight from eating healthy foods, and you can also lose weight from eating unhealthy foods. It's really more so about how much you're consuming as opposed to necessarily the foods themselves. It's just easier to gain a lot of weight when you're eating unhealthy foods because they tend to be extremely high in calories. So no, I don't agree with Dr. Chris Van Tulleken that we don't have any control over our weight or over our size, etc. The consumption, the overconsumption is the problem, not necessarily the foods themselves. I think we just need to teach people how to engage with these foods in a more healthy or moderate way.
All the data says that this will make the problem worse. Doctors already show more prejudice against people who live in larger bodies, against people with obesity, than any other group, than any other ethnic group.
You think it could even become racist and misogynistic.
So
what do you mean by that?
What we have to think about is who is affected by the obesity crisis. Primarily, we're all affected, but it's the people who gain the most weight are people who are forced by economic circumstances to eat this food. Policies that say groups who live with obesity
but how
must
does
pay...
this drug change the way they are eating? Because the whole thing...
To answer the question about racism, if we have a policy that discriminates against people who live in larger bodies, that will necessarily discriminate against women, people of colour and other disadvantaged groups.
Yeah, but how is this drug helping long-term?
Now, what he's saying here might be dismissed by some as a virtue signal, but he's actually partially correct. Now, I disagree with his claim that implementing this would be racist and misogynistic, because that implies intentional malice against these groups, when the reality would be more so that these groups would be collateral damage as opposed to intentional targets. The racism claim stems from the fact that in the UK, black people are the most overweight or obese racial group compared to other racial groups. Chinese people seem to be the skinniest, black people seem to be the fattest, and that's just what it is. So because of that, if we were to implement something like this where obese people have to pay for their healthcare, it would affect black people more than every other racial group because they are the most obese. But I disagree with his claim that this is racist, because when you say that it's racist, you imply that there's intentional malice there, when in reality it would affect us more because we're more overweight, not because we're black. And also, by his logic, does that not also mean then that it's racist to not try and resolve the obesity epidemic, considering it negatively impacts black people the most. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, I have absolutely no idea where the misogyny accusation is coming from. Men are statistically more likely to be overweight or obese than women, so if this was implemented, it would affect men more than it affects women. So I guess you could technically argue that it could be misandrist to put in law or put in a policy that says that obese people have to pay for their healthcare. But just like with race, I disagree that this would be an example of the country being misandrist. The reason why men are being affected by it more, or the reason why men would be affected by it more, is because they are more overweight and more obese, not because they're male. So yeah, I have no idea where the accusation of misogyny is coming from. It just kind of feels like it was just thrown in there. It's just like an extra, just to bulk it up a little bit.
We're basically saying people should stay on this drug forever.
That is exactly what we're saying. I completely agree with you, Eva. Until we change the food environment, nothing will change. So there is no intervention for weight loss that works other than surgery or these drugs.
Healthy eating, or educating.
See, stuff like this is what makes me want to face palm. How can a doctor say things like, oh, well, you're basically stuffed because you are forced to eat like this, you are forced to be this way by these companies that you have absolutely no control over. And then to go on and say that the only weight loss interventions that work are surgery and drugs. That's it. Those are your only options. If you really want to be able to successfully lose weight, the only options you have that will actually work is drugs and surgery. Because all of those people who you've seen successfully manage to lose weight with diet and exercise and lifestyle changes, they were all just a figment of your imagination. That's just not going to happen for you. This is such a defeatist attitude, and it really is sad to see a doctor saying this kind of stuff, because there are people who genuinely think like this. And so when you see a doctor, a professional, echoing these kind of thoughts, then it just legitimizes people's pessimism. If you're already feeling like, why bother? Because there are some people who genuinely think that weight loss is an unobtainable goal, and it's not something that you should even bother doing because it's not your fault that you're overweight. And while there are, of course, the small exceptions of people who genuinely can't control being obese because of medical conditions or whatever, the vast majority of people are overweight because of overconsumption. But they still feel as though their weight is out of their hands and out of their control, probably because they've attempted to lose weight before through fad diets and all these kind of things, which often don't work because they're not sustainable. So because they fail to lose weight through these means, they often start to think that the actual goal of losing weight is unobtainable. And now they have a doctor who will just simply confirm that for them. And so why would they even bother to try?
Basically, as a doctors, we should treat the cause, not the symptom.
Okay.
We are treating the symptom at the moment.
Can I just say, use the word empowering. It doesn't empower people who are struggling with a medical problem to demand that one group pays for a medication. It's unethical.
You see obesity as a medical problem, not as something that's a consequence of a bad
absolutely.
diet.
Obesity, the data are so clear. Obesity is a collision of genetic risk factors plus a food environment.
Our genetics has not changed over the last 50 years.
Absolutely.
Our environment has changed.
What I would ask you is, if this is costing 40 million, but obesity costs the NHS 6.5 billion.
Imagine if we put this money in the education and support for long-term prevention and care.
Do people really need education to know that overeating or eating highly processed food is a bad idea?
No.
Yes, they do. You would be surprised how many people don't know very much about nutrition or portion control or anything like that. There are a lot of people who aren't very well educated on nutrition, and they think a lot of foods that are not healthy are healthy. For example, cereals are something that many people think are healthy and start their day with that. Juice as well is another thing that a lot of people think is healthy when it's not really that healthy. There are a lot of foods that people obviously know are unhealthy, like a donut or cake or whatever, but there's a lot of like other foods that kind of are marketed as healthy or have this perception of being healthy but are actually very, very high in calories. And as I said before, it's not so much necessarily always about the food you're eating, but more so about just how calorie rich that food actually is. A Diet Coke has less calories in it than orange juice, but yet people would think that the orange juice is healthier, which it is healthier because it has more vitamins and stuff in there. However, it's so much more rich in calories, so it is gonna make it harder for you to lose weight if you're drinking tons and tons of juice, as opposed to just drinking water or drinking sugar-free squash or something like that. So I do think that educating people about nutrition would be very, very helpful. And I also think that teaching people how to cook from a very early age, from like as early as primary school, to be honest. I think we should get in there early, because for many young kids, they come from backgrounds where their parents may not know how to prepare good healthy meals, and so they have nowhere to learn this stuff. And so if they're not also learning it in school, then unless they take the initiative to go online and look into it, but they might not do that. And so I think it is kind of good to kind of instill good habits into them as early as possible. And one way to do that would be to teach them as early as primary school how to prepare good, healthy, nutritious meals for themselves. Because I think it's a lot harder to lose weight than it is to not be obese or overweight in the first place. And for many people, they are the size that they are because of habits that were instilled in them from when they were children, and it becomes very, very hard to break when they become adults. So I really, really don't think we should scoff at the idea of education, because yes, while most people know the obvious unhealthy foods like donuts and chocolates and all that kind of stuff, there are a lot of other foods that are unhealthy that people mistake for being healthy. So we should really work harder to educate people about that.
Why not give them the jab for proportionally a tiny amount of money, 40 million compared to 6.5 billion? You can save their lives as well as saving the NHS budget.
First of all, the side effect profile and risk what comes with years to come is one thing that is totally unknown. We are telling people to stay on this drug forever, which is unsustainable. Really, we need people to actually do permanent changes. We need to teach them what to eat, how to compose the daily diet. At the moment, people are eating a lot of...
What if they ignore the lessons that you want to teach them and they stay overweight? Surely then there's an argument for a quick fix.
We can't keep relying on short-term fixes. At what point do we start to see the value in long-term solutions? Because what we're doing right now is not sustainable. It is not sustainable. We can't just keep, as one doctor put it, we can't just keep trying to repair the windows within a burning building. If a building is on fire, what good are you doing by just trying to repair the windows when the fire is still going on? Like, you need to put out the fire. By decreasing the number of people who end up obese in the first place, I think that we were going to make a much bigger impact than just trying to fix it after the fact.
Can I just ask, before we leave it, your top tip, if you find yourself very overweight, what is your top tip, Dr. Eva Osman?
Start increasing your fibre intake from vegetable-based food. So increase and eat cabbage, courgette, broccoli, start making homemade vegetable soups. Increase that and reduce your cereal-based food. That is number one, and you already get results with that.
What would your number one top tip be? No ultra-processed?
No, I have no advice for people who want to lose weight. They have my love, my support. They live in an environment that essentially forces them to be the way they are. And frankly, we need to vote to regulate the industry that drives weight gain.
Okay. Dearie me. Can you imagine going to your doctor, if by some miracle you manage to get a GP appointment, and you go to them, hey doc, I think I want to lose weight, you know, I need to lose weight. Do you have any advice? And he just turns around, gives you a hug, and just says, I don't have any advice for you. It's these naughty food companies that are making you the way you are. It's not you. No. You've done nothing. It is these companies. They are the ones that need to change. Oh, okay, doc. But how long is that going to take? I don't know. You'll probably have a heart attack before that happens. But in the meantime, you have my love and my support. I don't know. It's really disappointing to hear a doctor talk like this, because I think two things can be true at the same time. Yes, we should definitely have a conversation about the food industry, and certain things that they do maybe should not be allowed, like advertising. Like here in the UK, unlike America, you can't advertise pharmaceuticals. So you can't advertise, we would never see an advert on our television for some kind of, unless it's like Gaviscon or like something low level like that, but we don't get anywhere near as much advertising for drugs, like pharmaceutical drugs, as Americans do. And I think that maybe I've seen some people suggest that we should do the similar thing for fast food. It might have even been Dr. Chris Van Tulleken, to be honest, who suggested this, that we should not advertise junk food on television, especially not on children's TV shows or TV channels, etc. Like perhaps we should stop actively promoting it, And also, you know, when you go to a supermarket, usually when you go to the till to pay, that's where all the junk food is. That's where all the quick snacks are, the drinks, the fizzy drinks and all that kind of stuff. I've seen some people also suggest that maybe we should change that. So instead of having like having like fizzy drinks and chocolates and crisps and all that kind of stuff at the till, we should maybe have healthier food alternatives instead, because often people will impulsively buy these things just while they're waiting to pay. And so if we know these things about human behavior, perhaps we can use our knowledge of human, but in the same way that the food industries have used human psychology to understand how we act and how we behave, to know exactly how to place everything in supermarkets so that we're more likely to purchase it, perhaps we could use that to encourage people in a healthier route as opposed to an unhealthier one. And also I've seen a lot of people comment about things like the deals that shops also often have. They tend to have a lot more deals on unhealthy ultra processed foods, but they tend to have a lot less when it comes to healthy foods. So perhaps also changing stuff like that as well could also be ways that we can encourage people down a healthier route. And I think that it's definitely a conversation worth having. So I do agree that the food industry and also just how we kind of encourage behaviors can definitely be improved, and definitely is something that we can do to try and make it easier for people to eat healthy. However, I also think that personal responsibility is also something that needs to be in the chat, because you can regulate the crap out of the food industry and you can do all sorts of stuff in terms of trying to control it and all this kind of stuff. But if people don't want to eat healthy, they will not eat healthy. So I do think that while it's good to also have discussions about how the food industry and supermarkets and everyone involved within the food industry, how they can improve and encourage people down a healthier route, I also think it's important for people to feel as though they have agency within their own lives and feel empowered to make the decisions that will encourage them down a healthier lifestyle. And as opposed to them feeling as though they have no control because what's going on around them is going to dictate their outcomes. I just don't think that's a healthy way to do it at all, because we could regulate the absolute crap out of the food industry and people could still be very much obese, because at the end of the day, if they don't want to eat healthy, if they don't want to change their lifestyle, if they don't want to turn things around, then they don't have to and they won't. So it is important to remember the importance of agency. That's where me and Dr. Chris Van Tulleken unfortunately don't see eye to eye. I think a lot of the other stuff he says is really interesting, very insightful, and I think he raises a lot of very good, valid criticisms about the food industry. Where he loses me is where he just completely throws personal agency and personal responsibility in the bin. But anyways, I would like to know what your thoughts are on this. Do you think that it is the food industry's responsibility to fix the problem of obesity? Do you think that the responsibility relies more on the individual? Or do you have a similar take to me and think it's a bit of both? I think that we should do both things at the same time. Encourage people to also take personal responsibility for their lifestyle choices and their food habits, while also simultaneously trying to see what we can do with the food industry to make it an easier process for people to live a healthier life. Either way, I would love to know what you actually think about this, so do let me know in the comment section down below. If you've enjoyed this video, you may as well like and subscribe. Thank you so much for giving me your time today, and I will see you in my next video.